Welcome back, guys. In this part of the lecture, we'll talk about the sleep stages. So the easiest way to break this down, there are two basic types of sleep that we'll kind of go throughout an evening or an episode of sleep. There is rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep, which you might have heard of before, which comprises about 20 to 25% of sleep. Some people try to break this down, saying there's two phases of REM sleep. For the purpose of this class and just in the general literature, there is one type of REM sleep. So just one type, one stage of REM. And then there is non-REM sleep, so non-rapid eye movement sleep, non-REM sleep, which comprises about 75 to 80% of sleep, the majority of what we do when we sleep. And you might often see that stage 4 and stage 3 of non-REM sleep are grouped together, but for the purpose of this class and what you see generally throughout the literature, there are 4 stages. So there are 4 stages of NREM sleep. Sometimes you see stage 4 and stage 3 grouped together under the umbrella of slow wave sleep, but they are a bit different. So 5 total stages, 1 of REM and 4 of NREM, or non-rapid eye movement sleep. Now, each stage of sleep is linked to specific brain waves that we observe on an electroencephalograph, or an EEG, that correspond to different patterns of activity in the brain that transpire during sleep. And we also see different eye movements, neuroactivity, and muscle tone. We'll go over that kind of stage by stage too. And when we sleep, we progress through all stages and cycles. So we'll do a cycle that goes from stage 1 through stage 4 and then to a period of REM, and then we repeat that throughout the day. We don't stay in one cycle all night, and we don't stay in one like for hours. We kind of cycle through multitudes of that stage. In fact, we go through about 4 to 5 full cycles per night, with each cycle lasting between 90 to 110 minutes. This is kind of why that 7 to 8 hour window we'll get into later on for ideal sleep. That's why it corresponds to that, because we know like you need at least an hour and a half-ish to get through all those cycles of sleep, and you need, the more of those you have, generally the kind of the better rested you are, and because there's a typical progression we see. Now, in general, periods of NREM, so non-REM sleep, again, which was what we kind of start out in stage 1, and then we progress through stage 4, and we repeat that pattern. Again, so we start in stage 1, progress all the way through stage 4, have a REM period, and then repeat the cycle. NREM sleep are characterized by decreases in muscle tone, heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, and metabolic rate. And it's where we see all these parameters at their lowest values, kind of our almost like a recovery period. Everything kind of very low. Body movements are reduced in these periods, especially compared to when we're awake. But it's not uncommon. And it's actually maybe fairly common that we see changing in positions, tossing and turning occurring during these NREM or non-REM sleep. Now, during periods of REM sleep, or REM, rapid eye movement sleep, these are characterized by increases in blood pressure, heart rate, metabolism, almost to as high as we see when we're awake. And again, as it's kind of classified, this is the period where we see these rapid rolling eye movements. They're moving almost, I think we have clocked at about 30 degrees per second. They're moving really, really fast. It's also characterized by paralysis of very large muscles, twitching of fingers, and it's kind of interesting that we see this happen during these REM cycles. But REM sleep is only found in mammals and in juvenile birds. Like, we don't see this in other species besides mammals. It's kind of interesting. So the first stage that we start in when we lie down is stage 1 NREM. Okay, it's a changeover period from wakefulness to sleep. Stage 1 is the beginning of an episode of sleep. So we start in that, again, we go through multiple cycles. The first starting point is NREM. And this lasts about 1 to 7 minutes. So throughout an entire night, we've only spent about 2 to 5% in this stage 1, which is like a transitional stage. So again, it's the transition from wakefulness to sleep, and then into subsequent cycles. We see low amplitude, mixed frequency waves, and we'll show what those look like in a bit. We call those theta waves, and we'll show you kind of what they look like in a bit. Some of the physiological changes we see here are decreased heart rate, respiratory rate, your eye movements begin to slow, your muscles begin to relax, and you're beginning, you may see occasional twitches, but you're beginning to fall asleep. And we can all kind of, you know, understand and appreciate what this feels like when you first lay down. That's basically what you're kind of going through in that stage 1 sleep. You're changing over from being awake to falling asleep. This is a very relatively light sleep, and you can be very easily interrupted by noises or disturbances. So if you've ever been like woken up in the middle of the night, this is probably the stage you might have been in. Or if you ever have difficulty falling asleep, it's because the first stage is this NREM, this very low threshold for disturbances to create arousal or awakening. So again, first stage, transitional period's pretty short. We're starting to ramp things down before we move on to the next stages. And it would make sense as to why we see the brain waves look fairly similar to almost what we see during awakening. They are distinctly different, but I'll show you an example of what we're talking about when we get into the waves. Stage 2, or non-REM sleep, which is again the next subsequent stage. So go from stage 1 to stage 2. This lasts about 10 to 25 minutes of initial sleep. And it comprises about 45 to 50% of total sleep. You spend more of your time in repeated cycles of stage 2 than any other sleep stage. It's the final light sleep stage that you have before we move into our deep sleep stages or slow wave sleep stages, stage 3 and 4. But it's the longest one we stay in sleep. It's about half of what we go through just in a single stage, and it gets longer every successive cycle. And again, we do about 4 to 5 cycles of all 5 stages in a night. So we do 4 to 5 cycles of each 5 stages. The EEG, we see again those low amplitude, mixed frequency waves. The hallmark of the stage 2 is we see these sleep spindles and these K complexes. And we think these K complexes and stuff are involved with memory and learning, these spikes. In fact, we find that when individuals learn a new task, they have significantly higher spindles, these sleep spindles, compared to what we see in someone who's not learning something. So the sleep spindles we think are very heavily involved in learning. So when we see someone who learns a new task, we see a higher density of these sleep spindles compared to controls. We'll go over what that means in a bit. The K complexes, we actually see brief increases in blood pressure, arousal, and very large body movements. Like we mentioned, like you may, these lighter stages, you might, these NREM stages, you might see tossing and turning, and that's where that kind of comes from. Physiological changes we see again, continued decreases again from stage 1 can continue to decrease through stage 2, and heart rate, respiratory rate, eye movements stop during this stage, so no more eye movements. Your muscle relaxes even further, and your body temperature begins to decrease. And we'll go over why that's important later on. We're talking about sleep environment, but your body temperature does decrease as you sleep. You kind of cool down. Your metabolism kind of decreases overall too. Again, you might see these brief jumps in blood pressure and heart rate with these K complexes. It's still a light sleep, but it will require a little bit more intense disturbances to kind of wake you up compared to stage 1, right? So again, you're falling into a deeper sleep through each stage, 1 through 2, and then we get into stage 3, right, which is only a few minutes. It's about 3 to 8% of total sleep. This is characterized by these high amplitude, low frequency waves we call delta waves. They kind of look like a triangle. We refer to this as slow wave sleep. Again, low frequency, high amplitude, and we'll kind of we see this both in stage 3 and stage 4. So during this stage, both 3 and 4, this is why they kind of get grouped together, because stage 3 is pretty short, and we see the lowest heart rates at these levels. Lowest heart rates, respiratory rates, your eye movements have still stopped, your muscles are very relaxed, body temperatures continue to decrease. This is a deep sleep that we kind of need to feel refreshed in the morning, and it requires even greater disturbances than we would see in stage 2, right? So again, it gets harder and harder to wake you up the deeper you move into these stages of NREM sleep, right? It's important to note that the stage 3, again, with only a few minutes, and it's typically a little bit longer in the first half of the night, so the first maybe 1 or 2 cycles. And then after we move from stage 3, or we go to stage 4, which is our, again, we're still in that deep sleep or that slow wave sleep. We're seeing those delta waves. This now we have, again, those high amplitude, low frequency waves. The duration of this stage is a little bit longer, 20 to 40 minutes, okay, and 15% of total sleep. So again, stage 3, we see the same exact kind of waveforms, but we're only in that stage for a little bit, and even less as we kind of move through sleep. Stage 4, we're in there a little bit longer, and typically it's a little bit longer as we begin to sleep. Again, heart rate and respiratory rate are at their lowest points. Your eye movements have stopped. Body temperature continues to decrease, and this is again that deep sleepy need to feel rested in the morning. Like, this is where all that kind of comes from. That very low, it's very, very, very these delta waves, these slow wave sleeps, and this is the point where like you are in your deepest sleep. This is where like it is the hardest to wake you up, right? So again, as you move through 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1's your lightest sleep, and it gets gradually deeper until you get to stage 3, and then ultimately stage 4, which is your deepest part of sleep, right? So you guys can see, like, it takes you, if you go through each stage, 7, 32, call that 33, 34. It can take you sometimes maybe about an hour to really fall into a deep sleep, to get to the point where you're getting that refreshing, recovering sleep. And then after we move from stage 4, we move into REM sleep. Okay, so REM is a little bit different than all your NREM stages. So in REM sleep, it's typically only about 1 to 5 minutes initially, but as we continue to sleep, it gets longer and longer, especially as we get closer to waking up. And again, that first REM stage should occur about an hour and a half right after falling asleep, right? Like, that's again why it's so important that we give ourselves adequate time to move through all these cycles. During here, the EEG activity becomes closer to what we see during wakefulness. We see these theta waves and very slow alpha waves occurring, which alpha waves are what we see kind of when we're awake. Physiological changes, this is where, again, if our NREM sleep, everything's decreasing. In REM sleep, everything is increasing. So heart rate, respiratory rate, particularly heart rate and blood pressure, are almost back to where they would be during waking levels. Respiratory rate increases, and it gets a little irregular. Arm and leg muscles become paralyzed, or you see atonia, like very low tone. And we see actually a very marked reduction in intercostal activity, which is important to note because we see lower tidal volumes, and with this lower activity in the intercostals, our diaphragm really has to kind of kick in for making sure we adequately ventilate. We actually do see PaCO2 or arterial CO2 concentration increase a little bit during sleep, about 2 to 4 millimeters of mercury, due to some of these changes in breathing and respiratory muscle contributions from our intercostals. We actually think that weakness potentially in the diaphragm and other muscles may contribute to some of the issues with sleep in certain populations. Pretty fascinating stuff. So again, kind of to the name of this stage, we have these rapid eye movements which move very quickly. Again, 30 degrees per second from side to side, in all kinds of different patterns and planes, in obliques as well. And this happens even in blind patients, which I find fascinating. The saccades represent about 14 to 27% of total REM time, and they last about 5 to 35 per minute. 5 to 35 REMs, or these rapid eye movements, occur per minute. So these happen very, very rapidly. The REM activity peaks 5-10 minutes after the onset of the REM period. So we see it more at the beginning, and then it begins to kind of gradually decline the movement of your eyes as you move through the REM stage. And then we see the frequencies increase as we continue on throughout the night. So we see, at the beginning, we see less REMs. We see more REMs as we move towards the end of sleep. And this is where most of your dreams occur. Though they can occur during NREM sleep, most of your dreams occur during sleep. And we think this is kind of linked to the eye movements. We think, one memory consolidation, you need both NREM and REM sleep, but we think something happens with these like the visual processing that occurs, in our brain. We think that it happens during the REM cycle, and we think the movements of the eyes are kind of corresponding to this processing that's happening in the brain. So it's pretty fascinating. Again, it happens even in blind patients, because again, processing of sight or inputs to different parts of the brain or parts of the brain, right? And again, we don't see this in any other species besides mammals, and again, there's maybe in young birds. Kind of fascinating. So again, this is just an example of what we see. Again, we move through each stage, right? As we sleep, stage 4, and then we go into our REM stage. We come back up to stage 1, come back down, stage 4, back to 1, and we transition. So we cycle 2, 3, 4, 5 stages, right? So the average length of the first NREM cycle, if we go through all 5 for the NREMs, 5 and the 1 of the REM, 5 total stages, is about 70 to 100 minutes, right? And the second one, and as we continue through, get longer and longer, ranging between 90 to 120 minutes. Again, looking at these stages here, considerably longer, right? Considerably longer than it was here, right? So again, these stages last longer as we go throughout the night. In normal, healthy adults, REM sleep increases as the night progresses and is the longest in the last 1/3 of the sleep episode. And we think this is almost kind of to prepare us for waking, because the brain activity we see during REM sleep is pretty similar to what we see almost when we're awake. And as the sleep episode progresses, stage 2 begins to account for the majority of NREM sleep, right? And again, 3 and 4 may sometimes completely disappear altogether. So again, EEG activity is different. Different stages of sleep and wakefulness. This is an example of what we see during wakefulness, or when we're awake. We have this low voltage, random and fast waves, and then as we get to drowsier, we get moving these alpha waves, and then in the stage 1 we move into these theta waves, right? So we see this mixed frequency, low amplitude. Stage 2, again, we talked about they're a low frequency, mixed frequency, low amplitude, but we may see these sleep spindles, and again, these sleep spindles are associated with that memory consolidation and learning. And this K complexes is when we see those bursts of blood pressure and heart rate. And then the deep sleep, which are stages 3 and 4, is when we see these delta waves, which are these high amplitude, low frequency, right? So very large amp peaks and valleys, but not moving super fast. And this is when we get that deep restorative sleep. And then REM sleep, again, if we just looked at the differences between these waves here, these beta waves, and what we see with awake, they look pretty similar. So again, we have different EEG activity corresponding to different parts of the brain being active during different parts of sleep. And again, physiological responses, like we talked about, we see in NREM sleep, everything sort of decreases, muscle tone, begins to kind of relax, but it's completely absent during REM sleep. However, our eyes are moving all over the place. Again, we see heart rate drop, but during REM sleep, everything kind of increases. And again, we think this may be just due to the visual processing that's occurring. There's a lot of, while there may be a very low muscle tone, there's a lot of activity going on in the brain. And then interesting to note, again, these changes in ventilation. And I do want to stress this a little bit, right? So, during NREM sleep, we see respiration decrease, and during REM sleep, we see it varies, a bit, maybe a little bit variable. Again, the big thing that we see here is there is a depression of respiratory muscle output, We see reductions in activity of the intercostals, and in terms of the upper airways relax. This is why it's really important to not drink when you go to sleep, because alcohol relaxes your upper airways as well and can cause other issues, and can potentially lead to like apnea or potentially aspiration. It's also why obesity can be a problem potentially with sleep apnea, because your upper airways already relax when you sleep. Obesity can soften and weaken that cartilage, and that can cause compression, leading to different problems maybe with breathing and maintaining your blood gases when you sleep. And again, potentially with obesity, they may have a weaker diaphragm due to the changes in muscle quality as well as some of the mechanics with the abdominal fat. I think that may be potentially linked to why patients with obesity develop sleep apnea or difficulty sleeping, because if you lose a large maybe 30% of the respiratory muscle contribution coming from your intercostals, 20 to 30%, and you have a weak diaphragm, you may have some problems, especially once the upper airways aren't as open as they would be normally. So we think these physiological changes during REM sleep can be critical vulnerabilities in people with neuromuscular diseases and respiratory muscle weakness, again potentially contributing to what we call sleep apnea. We'll learn more about that later. So again, body temperature decreases. So when you're awake, your body temperature is at its highest, and it increases gradually, right, as you begin to go out throughout your day. So when you fall asleep, it decreases, metabolic activity decreases, everything's kind of cooling down, and it's kind of move to that last third when you're starting to get almost transitioning to getting prepared to be awakening. Temperature begins to increase, a few hours before awakening, and then your body starts sending signals to produce heat production and conservation in order to just disrupt sleep and promote awakening. So as you begin to sleep, body temperature declines to kind of promote sleep and maintenance of that EEG activity. As you're moving towards like the end of sleep, your brain sends out signals to start increasing heat production, and to conserve heat, not dissipate heat, to conserve heat, to kind of warm your body up, and to promote awakening. And as you kind of rise throughout the day, your temperature kind of gets back to where it would be normally. So again, like body temperature is pretty important, as well as would be ambient air temperature. We'll talk about that in our sleep environment. So those are all the physiological changes during each stage of sleep. And it's important to understand these things because disruptions to these things can potentially lead to disturbed sleeping, or maybe even these sleep disorders. So that'll end our section there.